Great. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you are out west, and welcome to the 10th Annual Canadian Restaurant Investment and Leadership Summit. My name is Jacob Mancini, and I'm with CWB Franchise Finance, and we are your hosts for the event this week. I will, however, be wearing a few hats, one of which is acting as the MC for today's session, as well as the other sessions over the course of the summit this week. Before we get started, I do want to go through a couple of housekeeping items. So you know sort of how to participate and to maximize your experience in today's session. So we have about an hour and 15 minutes booked to go through the presentation, and hopefully there'll be a bit of time at the end for questions. You can submit questions by typing them into the question area of the control panel, and we will do our best to address a few hopefully at the end of the presentation. The session today will be recorded, and we will be sending out a link in the next week along with a copy of today's presentation for you to have and use as you need. Later this afternoon, we also are going to send a link around for a copy of the 2020 Canadian Restaurant Industry Review, which we produce every year and contains a bunch of insight and data on the industry. And finally, at the end of the presentation today, we will do a quick survey, and we ask you please to take 30 seconds or so to provide some feedback from the event. So now that the housekeeping is out of the way, I'd like to talk a bit about why we're here today. So, you know, since 2010, CWB Franchise Finance has been hosting the Canadian Restaurant Investment and Leadership Summit. So, like I said before, this is our 10th anniversary. And although things do obviously look a lot different than they have in the past, and we can't get together to network and catch up in person as we have in the past, it was still important for us to find a way to bring the industry together, to learn and to engage, you know, with others at some level, like as we normally like to do. So to that end, I guess we decided to focus on 4 of our most popular sessions historically and bring them to you over the course of this week in a series of 4 virtual sessions. So we obviously hope you can attend all of them, and you know, if need be, please register on our website to do so. Before we start today, I do want to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors for their support and their participation in the summit. And obviously, we couldn't have put this on without them, and we really do appreciate that support, especially in a year like this. So our platinum sponsors for this event are the Chicken Farmers of Canada and Cisco. Gold sponsors, Attitude Marketing, Castles, and Smooth Commerce. Our silver sponsors are Hub International, Dairy Farmers of Canada, Samsung, and Sotos. And our bronze sponsor is Foodbuy, Gating Contractors, and Lavazza. Also, I want to give a special thank you to the NPD Group, who is our premier research sponsor, and a special thank you to fsSTRATEGY, who, as they always have contributed to our 2020 restaurant review booklet, which we will be sending around later on this afternoon. So finally, before we get into today's presentation, I do want to play a brief video from today's feature sponsor, Chicken Farmers of Canada. This video speaks to animal care programs, which demonstrates the high level of care given to Canadian chickens. thank you, Chicken Farmers of Canada. So let's dive into today's presentation, which is our 6th annual Foodservice State of the Nation address. And just like we have in prior years, we're pleased to join forces for this this presentation with the NPD Group in order to deliver it out to everyone today. So I'm happy to welcome and introduce my co-host and my co-presenter, Vince Sgabellone from the NPD Group.
Good afternoon, Jacob, and thanks very much for having me here today. So just a brief introduction for those in the audience who don't know me. I'm a Director of Food Service and Industry Analyst at the NPD Group. And in this role, I help companies all across the industry to analyze and understand their business and to improve their performance and make better decisions. So I think this is my 5th summit now that I've attended, and I'm really excited to be presenting the State of the Nation with you here today. And I'm also really glad that you took over the role of MC, because I did that job last year, and I can say it's a lot more nerve-wracking than making a presentation.
You are 100% right, Vince. It's a lot to keep organized and kind of keep your head around. So I'm with you on that. I also like that you wore a blue jacket, just like I did. I think this maybe we should have coordinated on that a little bit, but otherwise, this seems to be this is our outfit for today, and so it is. So. All right, let's get started.
Let's get started then, yes. So our theme for today, the future food service industry will never be the same, only sooner than expected. Now, I've been in the food service business for over 20 years now, and like any industry veteran like myself will tell you, change is definitely a constant in this industry. It's a bit of a cliche, but it couldn't be more true than it is this year. If you had asked me at the beginning of 2020, I would have happily told you that the future of the food service industry would be changing in so many ways based on current trends. What I never could have predicted, of course, is just how fast that future was set to arrive. And so it is this theme of accelerated trends and rapid evolution that is going to prevail during our presentation today from Jacob and I. So we're going to take you on a journey through the last 24 months or so in the food service industry. We'll discuss where we were prior to the pandemic and what just happened these last 8 months or so. And then we'll provide you with an outlook, our outlook for the path ahead. Regardless of your role in the industry, consider how you will fit in with this new future, how you can survive and maybe even prosper during the current situation, and how you need to change to keep up. The future is here and there is no going back. So let's begin, like I said, with a brief look of where the economy and the food service industry in particular were prior to the onset of COVID-19.
Great. Well, listen, I think maybe a good place to start with that, Vince, is going to be a recap of where we were in February, at least from, in the economy. And there was some good stuff, going on at that time. And, the unemployment rates were at a lowest point in over 25 years. Consumer confidence, meanwhile, was close to as high as it's ever been, and similarly, the stock market also was sitting at close to an all-time high and had hit that actually at the end of February. Inflation as well, right? Very stable, around that 2% sweet spot. And if you look back over the sort of the 4 or 5 years before that, always within that 1 to 3% range that's considered acceptable. And while there's a lot of good stuff going on, there is a sense in 2019 that the economy was starting to slow down, and there certainly was some signs to that effect. New loans for business were slowing, and it hit one of its lowest points in almost 10 years. Manufacturing was slowing down as well, right? So I found this interesting data point where anything below 50 means that the total manufacturing is shrinking, and we'd hit that point. We're actually below 50 for only the second time in 10 years. Debt to disposable income, quite famously, probably was at an all-time high, and that in part I think was driving consumer insolvencies to some of its highest levels, at least on a rolling basis in over 5 years. So if we're having that kind of discussion about what's happened in the last 7 or 8 years, I think it's probably important and interesting to look back at some of the chief concerns, some of the opportunities that we had in this industry, a year ago. So. When you look at concerns, for example, there's a distinct pattern around the cost of doing business in the segment, I think, which is a bit telling of where we were at that point, right? I mean, first of all, you had costs rising, utility, minimum wage, cost of food, And I think there was a perspective out there that we hit a bit of a ceiling on pricing, and there wasn't, couldn't really improve these metrics by driving higher menu prices. And of course, I think ironically, we've also discovered that consumers are willing to pay more, and we just didn't know it at the time. But with that in mind, I think it also spoke to the reality in the market that we were pretty saturated, and traffic counts were sort of flat or down, right? And so growing share in that way wasn't really an option, and increasing profitability by fighting costs was probably the best way to go out and do that. And if you look back at opportunities, I think what jumps out at me is the first one, right? Menu innovation. I think if I go back to my presentation last year, so much of it was around the concepts of sustainability, the environment, organic, local options, plant-based proteins, cannabis infusion, all of which was tied to enhancing and evolving menus to try to match with some pretty fast-changing consumer demands. So on that note, when we look back to what was trending in the news this time last year, you really do see a reflection and an extension of those top 5 opportunities. Look at concept evolution, right? As an example, food halls, entertainment concepts were really growing and providing sort of new forms of customers interaction and engagement, and also giving operators some access to some new revenue streams and different channels that they didn't have before. Real estate market was very, very tight and getting harder, right? A lot of brands had aggressive growth strategies, and they were driving rental vacancies to an all-time low. And with such little supply in the market, rates were probably as high as they've ever been. And similarly, the M&A market was very hot, and we've been seeing a lot of deals in the restaurant segment that was driving some pretty aggressive multiples. And again, this is thanks to private equity being more engaged and involved, as well as operators really starting to look at ways to improve margins.
And when we continue to look at from 2019, we can see that menu innovation was just as important during that year as it really has been for many years. All the buzz was about plant-based and where that was going in the market, in the food service market. New flavor profiles were always emerging. And as you already touched on, Jacob, the whole concept of sustainability and sourcing. But some other interesting things were also emerging late in 2019. We've got ghost kitchens that were evolving and a very credible influencer in the industry. Third-party delivery was growing and starting to actually make an impact on the market. And meanwhile, tech trends continue to push the envelope of what a restaurant experience actually meant. So let's take a look at some hard data now. So as he just touched on, the commercial food service industry ended 2019 in a positive position. Traffic, or visits as we also call it, were up by about 1% versus the prior year. Dollars were up by 3%, and growth is good, right? This is the slowest growth that we had measured for more than 5 years. So the industry was beginning to slow down. There were the economic storm clouds on the horizon that Jacob just touched on. And these are really starting to impact discretionary spending in consumer retail like restaurants. So breaking down that growth a little bit further, reported a 1% gain in visits to QSR, or quick service restaurants, and these comprise about 2/3 of all restaurant visits. And then there was also a 3% gain in the much smaller FSR, or full service restaurant segment. Now, for any US visitors who might be on the call today, you're going to notice this is a lot different than what you would have seen in that market, where FSR is actually in decline, being that the FSR segment is really sourced, and really the biggest contributor to the segment is the 55+ cohort. They have both the means, the economic means, time to visit this restaurant segment. Meanwhile, the QSR segment, it's much more favored by the younger cohorts, on-the-go crowd, and the busy parents and office workers still are really frequenting the QSR segment. So finally, on this list here, you also have what we call retail. This is not retail food sales, which I'm going to touch on in a few minutes. Purchases of food service through retail channels. So think of barbecue chicken from Grocery Deli, or the pizza slice that you grab at Costco while wandering around on a Saturday afternoon. This was flat in 2019, it's retail food service, and that is consistent really with what the grocery channel was experiencing overall. Along with the growth in FSR, came growth among the smaller chains and the independents that are dominant in that segment of the market. Now, over the preceding 5 years, these operator groups have been growing traffic faster than the large chains. And these large chains with 500 plus units, well, they are all concentrated within the QSR operator segment. So while it may look like or may seem like there's a fast food restaurant in every corner, and in some neighborhoods, like the one where I live in downtown Toronto, I think that is the case, it didn't necessarily translate into more volume for these major operators. Instead, consumers really had been supporting smaller operators in increasing numbers. Well, that was then, and this is now. So back.
So, right. So if we're talking about the now, I think maybe we start back by looking at the economy and what's happened since February. And as you expect, it's pretty ugly, right? Unemployment reached a high in May, 2.5 times what it was before, and it's still even now twice what it was pre-COVID. Consumer confidence, again, that was once so high, dropped 60% just about in 2 months, and still up. Still down 35%, and maybe even falling right now as things have spiked. The availability of new credit and new loans for business and individuals, which I had mentioned before, was already falling, has really continued to tail off. And in fact, consumer credit growth has actually fallen below zero, which is the first time this has happened in over 20 years. And finally, obviously, a classic measure of economic performance, the GDP has plummeted in 2020 as manufacturing and exports fell. And these are declines that have never been seen before, really, or anything close to it. And that includes the financial crisis in 2018, or pardon me, 2009 and 2010. So when we've seen what's happening to the economy. So the question then becomes, for example, what's happening with the consumers, and especially when you consider how the pandemic has really thrown off our normal routines and materially disrupted our day-to-day lives. And what I think we've seen here is a very rapid change in consumer habits and their approaches to spending and to saving. All of which are things that we'll probably never see again. And the first thing to recognize, I believe, is that consumers, they seem at least to have a lot more money, and within the households, for example, spending is way down as our normal routines and habits have been disrupted. And at the same time, disposable income is up as well, thanks to the less spending, obviously, but also thanks to some of the government programs that are out there as well. And I would expect as well, I guess, that there's probably also been a shift in mentality, spending mentality, as things have gone on, right? As Vince can demonstrate. But what the question, I guess, is what are consumers doing with some of this extra money? And for the most part, they're saving it. And saving rates have skyrocketed across households in Q2, increasing almost 700% since the end of 2019. And in light of some of these debt to disposable income metrics that I mentioned before, this probably isn't a good thing. But again, it's important to realize as well that they're not saving all of it.
So one of the biggest impacts on consumer spending brought on by COVID-19 is this decline in experiential spending. Annual spending in events like travel, concerts, movies, and sporting events used to amount to about $10 billion per year. These industries have effectively gone to zero overnight in March. So as damaging as this is to the Canadian economy and the long-term effects it will have, it does help to provide some incremental room in consumer spending savings budgets, as Jacob just outlined, or in their spending budgets. And spend they did. NPD tracks a wide range of industries at retail, and some of these have fared much better than others during the pandemic. As consumers have eliminated or reduced spending on experiences, they've invested in areas to improve their lives at home. The video game industry, for example, it's seen the biggest lift in sales post-pandemic, with consumers investing in items to keep themselves and the kids occupied while sheltering at home. Meanwhile, technology and electronics industry has also seen a significant lift, with Canadians investing in technology to support working, schooling, and entertaining at home. And meanwhile, any parents in the audience today will tell you they'll know why toy sales have grown during this time. But meanwhile, most related to our industry, is really the sales of small appliances and housewares, both of which saw huge increases in consumer demand as consumers have rediscovered the kitchens in their homes and started cooking again. So this is one area of spending that I'm going to come back to a little bit later. The industries that were negatively impacted by the pandemic, well, these are all influenced by our more casual lifestyle at home. Apparel, footwear, beauty, these sales have all fallen by about a quarter during this time. And just like food service, much of this spending is indeed discretionary. One other area where consumers have been spending is in grocery stores. We all saw the images, and probably many of us were stuck in the mad rush to fill our homes with grocery essentials and to stock our pantries as the beginning of the pandemic started to take hold in March. March and April indeed were record months for the grocery industry in Canada, and that positive trend has subsided slightly, but it has continued ever since. All total, COVID-related growth in Canadian grocery amounts to over $6 billion spending over the last 7 to 8 months, according to our friends over at Nielsen. So it's not like Canadians were not buying food, they're simply buying differently. And so when we cover the decline in food service sales, think back on these prior two charts to understand where these dollars are going. According to NPD Crest data, commercial food service spending is down by about $11 billion this year already. Restaurants Canada, meanwhile, are projecting commercial food service to reach just $52 billion this year, wiping out about 8 years of growth in just a matter of months. That equates to a loss of about 1 billion visits for the year. While our partners over at fsSTRATEGY will tell you that same-store sales growth is projected to decline by over 50% this year. The food service industry has been hit very hard, make no doubt about it. Now, April was the worst month for declines, where visits dropped by over 40%. Full-service restaurants in particular were the hardest hit during this time, declining by about 70% in traffic. By August, all segments had regained about half of their worst drop, but there remains much work to go. It's really interesting when I look at data from around all the other global markets where we collect Crest data. These curves all look very, very similar. The depth is a little bit different in some countries. Some were hit harder, some not quite as hard as Canada. But this flattening of the recovery curve since about the third month of the pandemic is very consistent. Unfortunately, of course, this is not the curve we were all hoping to flatten. Now, hardest hit during this time has been the earlier day parts, morning and lunch specifically. With our routines all disrupted and so many of us not leaving home, it means that we're not eating out of home as much while doing something else or on our way somewhere else. So while morning meal remains the largest meal of the day, it has also lost the most volume of visits. Stats Canada reports, for example, that 30% of the workforce has transitioned to working from home. And so this decline in morning visits is certainly not a surprise. It's a shock certainly to the industry, but it does not come as a surprise. Meanwhile, one other theme has emerged. We're all snacking more. The best performing day part, if you can call a -16 the best of anything, is the PM snack day part. This is being driven by demands for indulgent food items and things to help us through the work from home doldrums. Or it's also an opportunity for adults and parents to get away from the kids for a while maybe. Plus the kids themselves, the under 18 crowd, and even to some extent the 18 to 24 crowd, they're also continue to gather outside the home, and they're gathering at restaurants. You know, especially with no school, no activities, no shopping for a long time, and fewer summer jobs. They had nothing else to do other than hang out. Now, obviously, on-premise visits would be the worst impacted during the lockdowns, down by 3/4 so far this year. Now, this has hurt the FSR segment, as this group has relied on the on-premise dining for 80% of their business prior to the pandemic. Now, off-premise during this time, well, it's actually grown, and that's thanks largely to the drive-through category. Now, in case you're wondering, yes, I do know how to read my own charts. I see that delivery has almost doubled during this time, up by 87%, and in 3 or 4 months, it actually did more than double. But delivery still represents just 8% of all restaurant visits, up from about 4 to 5% in the prior year. So it is absolutely a growth driver, and it has been for years. Remember, we're talking about accelerated trends here, but right now the volume growth is going through the drive-through window, and that's largely a QSR play. So with all that's happened in 2020 and the ways it's impacted the economy, the consumer, and the industry, the question really becomes, what happens now? To begin with that discussion, I'll turn it back over to Jacob.
Thanks, thanks, Vince. Yeah, so the answer to what's going to happen now, I think, is change, right? And it's not just any old change. It's not change on account of the pandemic, but it's change that's in the form of trends and behaviors that were probably already happening, or were going to happen regardless, and they've just been sped up on account of the current environment. So we've gone through and we've identified 5 interesting and, again, accelerated trends that we think are we're going to be seeing a lot more of, or be thinking a lot more of, at least, as things move forward, both in this current environment, but also in sort of a post-COVID world. And the first trend that I think we'll see a lot more of in the very near future, and again, this is one that's already been happening and we've already been seeing for a while now, is the transformation of the space. And when I say transformation, I'm not just referring to the physical space or the layout or the access, but I'm also, I'm really thinking about also a change in the revenue mix of the restaurant itself, right, and the sources, by which they're generated. And again, I think that the pandemic really did expose some areas of weakness in the industry, and I think operators really are motivated to figure out ways to pandemic-proof their concepts. And one thing that the pandemic has taught us, without question, that drive-through is king, right? And those are and those with drive-through, and maybe even to a lesser extent ones with takeout and delivery-focused models, really have won the last 7 or 8 months. So in that vein, this is an example that caught our eye and has been getting a lot of press. A revamp that is almost entirely focused on off-premise. So you're talking about fully automated inside and outside, multiple drive-through lanes, including one drive-through lane that's exclusively dedicated for pickup from third-party delivery aggregators. Obviously a completely frictionless outdoor order ahead and pickup area, and lots of outdoor space for dining. And this is something this is obviously not the only example that we've been seeing where these prototypes are being tweaked to take advantage of this off-premise dining, right? We've seen stories of Chick-fil-A opening as many as 4 temporary drive-throughs in parking lots, or Chipotle, who now seems to be looking strategically for stores that have drive-through access. What they're calling they're called Chipotle lanes. And this obviously isn't going to be a solution for everybody. There's going to be existing locations and concepts where you can't make these kinds of drastic shifts. But I'd be willing to bet that any new opportunity, any renovation, is going to include elements of this baked in. So I mentioned frictionless before, and certainly through this pandemic, the idea of minimum contact and simplicity has become more important than ever. And I think what's really interesting here when you talk about frictionless is the way it's kind of helped to reestablish and re-envision some classical concepts, right? One of these, for example, is the automat, which was effectively the original fast food concept. And the way it's been reborn in a modern, fresh kind of way that is the ultimate frictionless experience. And there's tons of examples out there, and I just threw a couple up here, and Little Caesars doing their pizza portal, or more locally, a group like Paramount, who's rolled out a touchless ordering grab and go concept called Boxed, or even in Toronto, there's a small chain here that has automatic coffee machines and dispensers that you can access. So almost again a modern take on that classic coffee machine you might have found in a hospital or an office. And then the other interesting sort of frictionless thing that's been reimagined here, I think, is curbside. It was once upon a time that a lot of brands built their concepts around the idea of delivering food straight to the car, right? So think about servers on roller skates, and that trend sort of disappeared. And now bringing food to the car for you to drive off with is one of the most popular and growing elements of this industry. So, and I also find it a little bit funny too that there was a period of time, maybe 10 years ago, where there was a big push for curbside pickup, and a lot of concepts put a lot of money and marketing power and set their sights up for it, and it kind of disappeared because nobody wanted it. And so interesting, I think, to see where things have come and how things have changed. So, as I said, transformation wasn't going to only be physical, and there was going to be an evolution of new and different types of revenue streams. And especially sort of as you look at the emergence of a more of sort of an omni-channel kind of approach to revenue and strategy. And one of these things that's definitely happened, and we referenced it before, was ghost kitchens. And I'm sure everyone listening here is very familiar with it. But what we've seen recently is the industry kind of taking that evolution to the next step in the form of these virtual brands. And virtual brands are obviously not entirely new, and we've probably all run into them on our delivery apps before. But historically, they've been more one-offs, right? A local player, or even the ghost kitchen itself. And the difference now is it's being done by major brands. And you look down the U.S., for example, and you see all these scenarios where there's wings and pizza and burgers and chicken tenders, being sold out of the back doors of existing Chili's and Applebee's and Outbacks and Chuck E. Cheese restaurants. And obviously, if you look at this from a brand perspective or an operator perspective, I think it makes sense. You're creating a brand that's centered around the most popular or maybe your most high margin dishes. You could potentially reach new customers, and you've effectively created thousands of locations without having to invest a penny into infrastructure, which is quite appealing. Here's another example of where sort of this omni-channel multi-revenue approach continues to show up and is going to continue to sort of blur the lines between restaurant and retail. And pre-pandemic, this idea of grocery was pretty small, but it really did take flight as a lot of restaurants used it as a way to sort of look to unload inventory. And I think this idea really does have legs, and it's especially true if you believe, as I do, that restaurants in the future are going to be built around a philosophy that there's much a pantry and sort of a pickup and delivery window as they are a sit-down dining experience. And if you look at this, it's a real strategic way to complement your takeout and delivery experiences. It helps you expand and introduce new products, and also it's a really great marketing tool as well. And sorry, one more slide on this example of blurring of restaurant and retail. And we are going to touch more on the impact of meal kits later in this presentation. But this does sort of highlight the growing alignment between restaurants and the grocery segment, and how they kind of are working together in both a partnership and in a revenue growth point of view. So if you look at this example from Loblaws and what they've done from, again, that marketing perspective, it really resonates, right? You've got, for brands that don't have capacity or even the physical locations in certain areas to meet meal kit demands, this is a really great solution. And I look at this and I think a lot of this compares well to that contract brewing experience that you see in a lot of craft beer spaces here in Canada and across the world. Vince, back to you.
Thanks, Jacob. And so moving on to accelerated trend number 2, I'm going to talk to you about sheltering at home. Because one thing that sheltering at home does is it removes many of the key drivers of restaurant visits. The whole experience of dining out is now replaced with a simple act of obtaining food. Now, sure, we all have to eat, but a restaurant meal consumed at home really just is not the same as a meal out at a restaurant. And yet, even while sheltering at home, it is very encouraging to see that we do continue to dine out. So restaurant meals consumed at home now represent almost half of all restaurant meal occasions. Canadians still need to eat, and with everybody home with the kids and with the spouses and partners, a restaurant meal still provides a nice diversion during the day. So to some extent, it remains one of the few experiences that, well, we can still actually experience. So as I mentioned, of course, movies, concerts, sporting events, and travel are all largely off the table, but gathering for a restaurant meal with a family is still an experience we can enjoy from the safety of our own bubbles. Returning once again to the theme of accelerated trends, it's interesting to note that meals consumed at home were on the rise long before COVID-19. Meanwhile, the opposite of this trend, if I can call it that, meals consumed at work or on the go, were on the decline. Again, COVID-19 didn't create the concept of work from home, it simply accelerated it. So how does the industry continue to provide a winning dining experience only at home? Well, here's some examples and some thought starters for you to get the conversation started. First of all, I love this one, a pizza subscription. Who wouldn't love the idea, or who doesn't love the idea of pizza arriving at your door just in time for dinner at the same time every week, or stocking up your freezer with your favorite pizza from your favorite local pizza provider. This is just such a great example of a local operator, in this case, a Toronto operator by the name of General Assembly, who has pivoted to a brand new business model during this time. Now, sure, they, like any traditional pizza operator, have always offered delivery and pickup and on-premise access modes. But soon after the pandemic started, they started offering frozen pizzas for people to take home and stock up their freezer. Now, I've been recommending this leftovers model for years, and it's too bad it took a global pandemic for someone to listen, but I'm glad somebody is, and hopefully many of you will. So now what they're offering with their frozen pizza model is a subscription, which I think is just a great idea. You know, like, how many families out there have a weekly pizza night? Now, I suspect some of you are holding up your hands right now, as you would be if we were all together in the same room. But this subscription model really is the ideal opportunity for that Friday pizza night with the family. It removes all the obstacles and all the hassles of ordering. And I guess, of course, technology is what makes this simple and accessible and frictionless. And I say frictionless because if you attended last year's conference, you'll recall that that was one of last year's key themes as well. So what other businesses, ask yourself, can also follow this subscription model? So here's another great example of operators pivoting to new business models. Meal kits that customers can make at home. So remember all those bored kids looking for something to do and all those brand new kitchen appliances I told you about earlier? What a great way to engage with your customers on a different level by helping them out with their shelter at home plans, by having them prepare your signature restaurant meals at home. Now, savvy operators like Eataly, pictured on the left here, in this example, are taking this a step further. They're actually hosting online events with their corporate chefs to walk their customers through the preparation of the kit. So this not only provides an opportunity, or even a different opportunity now, to engage with a customer, but it also turns the meal itself and the meal preparation into an event. And remember, these days we're all just craving more and more events. Meal kits also provide food brands, in my opinion, with a potential avenue to showcase their products in a way that in-restaurant occasions never offered. You know, take a look at the image on the right and just look at all the packaged items in this kit, just crying out in my suggestion for a logo. So, by the way, meal kits would also be a great candidate for the subscription model that I just discussed on the prior slide. Also a great opportunity for brands to include some free sampling to a brand new customer base. Now, as long as you are delivering a meal, don't forget those cocktail kits. Don't forget the dessert kits. And of course, kits provide an opportunity to sell meals in for the next day, or even to load up someone's pantry or freezer. And as Jacob just mentioned earlier, in the blurring of the lines between grocery and restaurants, as long as your delivery driver is making the trip, be sure to maximize the order and see if you can get some groceries added to it as well. Now, if you can't bring the customer to the restaurant for an experience, then restaurants are figuring out brand new ways to deliver an experience to our homes, complete with table decorations, alcohol, and all the party favors needed. In this case, the restaurateur also provides travel notes outlining the culinary journey that this meal is about to take you on. Sorry, scenery not included. Now, this is an ideal model, of course, for the upcoming holiday season. Big restaurant parties are off the table, so people will be looking for new ways to host catered meals from home rather than at their favorite restaurant. And the concept can also include virtual gatherings to include loved ones from outside of your bubble. McDonald's, for example, has recently introduced this latest option of virtual gatherings by including by partnering up with a online movie streaming service. You can now get your McDelivery included with a movie. It's a great opportunity for families to gather together at home or virtually to enjoy a meal and enjoy a movie together. The opportunities really here, thanks again to technology, really are endless. And now if you're thinking that these catered sort of parties aren't worth it and not worth your time, consider this example. I spoke with an operator just about a year ago, and they told me that Christmas is their busiest day of the year, and yet they don't serve anybody in the restaurant. This operator was selling more than 200 complete turkey dinners at $200 a piece, all booked and paid for in advance. I would have to say this guy was well ahead of the curve at that time, because now this is going to be all the rage for this year. Over to you, Jacob, for number 3.
Great. Thanks, Vince. So, another really important trend to keep an eye on here is how things are going to evolve and shift when it comes to real estate. And so much growth strategy historically, and I mean this for both operators and for landlords and developers, has been built around the concept of hub dining, right? So find an area where there's significant foot traffic, develop around that. And obviously there's nowhere that's been more evident than in areas of high activity and high traffic: malls, airports, office buildings, business districts, tourism markets, things like that. And the problem, of course, is that this pandemic has completely devastated so many of those, and to a point really where you have to wonder about when and how things are ever going to come back. So the concept of hub dining has been around forever, and but I really do think it evolved in the last 10 years as landlords started to really appreciate the idea of a restaurant as a main attraction, something that would bring people to their developments and keep them there, rather than sort of a secondary or a supportive attraction. So as traditional retail began to fall away and developers started to look to enhance their properties by mixing elements of retail and commercial and office space and residential, they turned to restaurants and F&B in general, I think, is the glue that kind of brought everything together and held it there. And and from there, I think we start to see this really creative new initiatives fostered by operators as well as their landlords, that blended retail and entertainment and food to create a destination venue and sort of foster community engagement at these sites. And again, going back to these concepts of entertainment and food halls, as some examples of that kind of sort of relatively new creativity and that was coming together. And so the first question here really is it really gone? And the answer to that is it's probably not. But when it does come back, it's going to look a lot different. And this speaks to the challenges that operators and landlords are facing in this environment right now. And you look at an example again, that work from home movement and what that's done to hub dining in downtowns and business districts. That's probably something that won't fully come back in the way it was before, especially as people look at other options related to office working and leases. But developers do know that those people have gone somewhere, and their money that they're spent has gone somewhere. So if you assume that for the most part, this is out into the suburbs or the residential areas of the city, then it does beg the question about whether you start seeing landlords and operators shifting from these old sites and targeting areas and regions for new hub dining that maybe weren't on your radar before. So I know that this is a bit of an odd visual, but I really do think it fits here. And as I've been thinking about this industry and peeling back the layers of this pandemic and the impact that it's had, the one thing I still can't quite get a handle on is what are landlords thinking? And obviously, don't get me wrong, this is not an insult or a knock on them, but instead I think it really crystallizes the point that I've made about hub dining, in that there's so much uncertainty out there, and that there's so much change that it's really hard to pinpoint a consensus opinion or a proper strategy on how to approach the real estate in this current market. And I think what we have realized, and what you are starting to see a bit of, is that every market and every situation is different. And so these decisions are going to be made at a localized level or at a specific level, right? So, and it doesn't really necessarily matter if you're talking about a renegotiation of a lease or pricing out a new development. Every strategy is going to be very unique. And I also think it's why, even 8 months, into this, when I talk to landlords or talk to consultants or folks, that involved in the real estate space, no one can really say for sure, what a market rent is at this moment, or how to structure a lease that would make sense for all parties. So as an aside to that, in our session on Wednesday on finance and growth and development, we are going to do our best to unpack some of this, and we have some interesting folks joining us to talk about these concepts, and hopefully we can shed some light on what landlords are thinking about. So one final comment on the real estate. One of the most interesting things I think that's jumped out to me from the CEO survey that you'll be getting a copy of later is, the number one strategy for operators as they exit this pandemic is to add units. Almost a quarter of the respondents said that this was going to be their primary strategy. And I guess this presumably the idea here is that these operators are going to come out of this, operationally sound and in a good position to grab share, right? Either from closed restaurant locations or from their competitors who have really been weakened by this. And I think that that's going to really have an interesting effect on the real estate, right? Because if you think about, how there's going to be a lot more supply thanks to the closures, which in theory should drive rental rates down, should drive overall values down. If a significant part of this industry is going to also look to grow and add, how much does that really kind of impact? How much does that increased demand impact and work against a driving down of market rates? So let's move on away from real estate now and talk a bit about brands again and what they mean to the Canadian food service landscape. Everyone listening and watching right now knows that and knows of the value of brands, right? And for consumers, they represent consistency of product, of menu, of service, of locations, and for operators, it's a proven business model that works. But interestingly, for consumers, as time has gone on, perspective and their relationship with these brands has really changed quite a bit, and it continues to do so, and will continue to do so. This. So as I mentioned early on, we've been seeing this growth in market share of the independent segment. Despite the fact that, interestingly enough, for years they have had and continue to have a shrinking footprint physically in the country. And so this growth, as we mentioned, has outpaced their larger counterparts, which probably seems a bit backwards, based on your standard thinking and what we know of this industry. But there are a couple of reasons why this has happened. Number one, consumer demand has really changed, and there does seem to be this desire to have something that's a bit more authentic, cool, different, and a desire to shop and eat locally. And on top of that, there's also been this emergence of a foodie culture, right, that consumers I think are attracted to. So chef-driven menus, international influences, different execution, all things that I think independents probably can achieve or perceive to be able to achieve in a way that brands can't. And so to this end, we've also seen these independent operators, are getting smarter and more organized, and we're seeing more and more of what we like to call chain, non-chain brands that are starting to emerge, right? So smaller regional groups that behave just like a small restaurant brand. They have economies of scale and scope. They've got management. They've got access to good resources. All these things. But each location operates under a different banner and has a more independent feel. And I think some of that is what's driving this traffic share growth that we've been seeing the last 5 years in that independent small chain category. So things are going really well for independents, especially when you stack them up against their chain counterparts. And then the pandemic hits. And what we've seen since March is obviously a far more rapid decline in independent traffic share compared to chain traffic, and a slower and sort of less aggressive rebuild of those sales since that hit. And granted, yes, some of this has to do with the fact that the independents are heavily skewed in full service dining, which has been slower to recover than the QSR, which we all know. But there is data and there is insight here that suggests there might be a little bit more going on. And for that, I think I'll throw it back to Vince to walk through it.
Thanks, Jacob. So one of the challenges that independents are going to face in this recovery is the fact that 25% of Canadians trust brands more to deliver the proper hygiene and safety protocols that they're looking for these days in restaurants. And we know that safety and hygiene are not going to go away in the food service industry for quite some time. Then we also see a quote from Coca-Cola, the president and CEO of Coca-Cola, telling us that he is actually seeing consumers shifting back towards known, trusted brands as well. And this is something that, again, I'm going to turn to our friends at Nielsen for to back this up, because they report that in Canada, anyway, the top 20 brands have outperformed the market during this COVID-19 time. So this is something that the top 20 brands have not done for quite some time. They typically have been trailing, as people have been in that space as well, moving towards the smaller brands, the niche brands, the specialty brands that you find on those top shelves. Now, just as with restaurants, there is a supply consideration here. Just as the restaurant chains were better equipped to handle the lockdowns, the big CPG brands were also a little bit better equipped to keep the supply chain full. Nonetheless, the big brands are really succeeding, while many of the little guys continue to struggle. And for the last point on this, I'm going to turn to our senior retail advisor at NPD with a quote from Matt Powell. So trusted brands, as well as those that have provided aid in some way during this challenging time, will benefit and be top of mind for consumers moving forward. Broadly speaking, consumers appear to be embracing brands that they can trust. And so think back again on the example that Jacob shared earlier with Loblaw partnering with local restaurants. So this helps them to strengthen their place in the eyes of the consumer by aiding local businesses through their meal kit delivery. So it helps this large brand become more local. And so the questions that really do remain for brands versus independents is, what is the future consumer demand going to be for these small, local, independent experiences? Will it return to its recent vibrancy, or will the change in the large brands be able to capitalize on the current momentum, their capital resources, and are they going to be able to maintain their newfound share gains? And so that's all for the real estate and the development side of the business. I'm going to take you now through our last trend. And this is not coincidentally also one of the biggest trends that we were tracking prior to this time. Because as I said, our theme today is really all about accelerated trends. So we're going to look at the digital revolution. One key future trend that we've been tracking at NPD across all of our categories is digital ordering, or e-commerce as many would call it. In food service, it took us 3 years to move from to triple our share from 2% to 6%. And then in just the last few months, we tripled again to 19%. As we've been saying, it's all about accelerated trends. Now, this trend has been transforming other retail categories for very many years. In some categories, more than half of all spending is now taking place through e-commerce. Now, yes, this has been accelerated due to COVID, but it was already well ensconced in many other retail industries. Now, food service digital share, while tripling during this last few months, still trails most of the other industries at just 19%. But now that this genie is out of the bottle, I know you can expect that e-commerce is just going to continue to grow in food service. The fastest growing cohort for e-commerce in food service is the 45 plus. So even these traditional holdouts to digital ordering are latching on to this revolution. And now this isn't just all about delivery, of course. It's about drive-through, it's about pickup, it's about click and collect. It's about all those platforms that we've been talking to you about here for the last 45 minutes. So as an industry, and whether you're an operator, a manufacturer, or a service provider, how do we mitigate the impact that this has on profitability, facility design, location selection, CRM and loyalty, and all of this, of course, how do we continue to maintain and enhance our guest experience? Well, to me, the best way to succeed in the digital universe, well, it's to embrace it. Don't run away from it, don't avoid it, because it's here to stay. There are ways that you can enhance every aspect of a restaurant's operation with the implementation of proper digital technology. From customer-facing tools like ordering, CRM, payment, and reservation systems, to back of house like POS, kitchen sequencing, and scheduling, technology companies are really stepping up and producing integrated platforms to help restaurants operate more efficiently and effectively, and pull all of these disparate pieces together under one umbrella. Now, it's interesting, one of the first tools that we saw during the reopening was this very small change. QR codes started appearing in restaurants, offering another touchless touch point, if I can use that terminology, for the customers by using QR codes and technology to deliver virtual menus to their customers. Again, this was one of the first technologies used, and this should be pretty simple for any operator to implement on a very quick basis. So what we've seen even just in the few months since COVID has taken place is that not only are these codes providing virtual menus, but they're now offering ordering platforms, and they're offering payment platforms and opportunities for the customer to split their bills. So even this one simple technology is evolving very quickly, and it's very quick and easy, I think, for operators to use. And this is one that I think is going to survive and thrive into the future. Now, of course, we cannot talk about technology without talking about the internet. Restaurant consumers who purchase meals digitally are surfing before they make their purchases, just like the buyers in every other consumer retail category. Now, about 1/4 of all purchases begin on a brand's own website, and about 15% go to Google first. And then this one surprised me. 10% of all online restaurant purchases begin at Amazon with an Amazon search. Now, I don't think Amazon is delivering restaurant meals just yet, so maybe this has to do with Alexa and our automated assistants. Regardless, it could definitely be an opportunity for your brands. And did you know that Prime members are more likely to have ordered a restaurant meal in the past 6 months than non-Prime members? So clearly, Amazon Prime members are engaged in ordering restaurant meals online. Now, regardless of where online customers begin their search, be sure that your brand is well represented. So confirm that your info is up to date. Make certain that your competitors aren't scooping up your customers in those Google searches. Be very diligent about monitoring and responding to reviews, both the positive and the negative, because social media is where people are going to understand about a brand, and it's where you can reach and influence your customers these days, and it has to be key to any digital platform. Again, I'm going to share another personal story with you here. So just after the lockdown, one of my favorite local restaurants, of course, did also have to shut down, but they remained very, very active on social media during this time. They kept in touch with their customer base and kept in touch with me and let me know about their reopening plans. So as soon as they reopened, they decided not to offer any delivery in the beginning. They didn't offer a digital ordering platform. They didn't offer, of course, their dining room was closed, but their activity on social media allowed them to get an immediate customer base. I was there the first weekend they opened, and there were many customers doing the same thing. So social media really helped to revive this individual restaurant during these very trying times. So absolutely a key part of any digital platform. And then finally, you're probably wondering about third-party third-party apps. So this is where almost 1/4 of all online restaurant purchases begin, and their influence is only going to continue to grow. They were already such a rising influence in the restaurant purchasing before COVID hit, reaching about 2/3 of restaurant deliveries in 2019, and now this is even more true. Customers just love their restaurant ordering apps, which are now capturing 8 out of 10 delivery orders. And you'll remember, I already told you that delivery orders have more than doubled during this time. So if you are an operator, you need to make certain that your brand is well represented in the space. If you're a manufacturer, you also need to work with your operator partners to ensure that your products, again, are well represented and easy to find in these digital spaces. So now I'm the first to admit that I'm really not an expert in these digital platforms and social media, but thankfully, Jacob and the organizing team have come up with some experts to help you out in this space. So be sure to attend our technology and food service session being held at this time on Thursday. There's still time to register, and we have a number of tech experts from different channels in food service who are going to be sharing their guidance and insights into the tech space in food service. But first, it's time to talk about the future, and for that, I will turn it back to Jacob. Where do we go from here, Jacob?
Well, thanks, Vince. So, I think, we start with what the industry was saying, and to go back to where we started, the industry was saying a year ago about the opportunities and what it's saying now. And, I think what jumps out at me here that's pretty interesting is that, pretty much everything that we were thinking about last year as an opportunity is still there, and it's still important. It's just been reprioritized. And, you look at the pandemic itself, really did keep creativity in the spotlight, right? But it's not as much about menus anymore as it was and was a big theme last year. Instead, it's about creativity within the concepts and the space itself. And this really resonates, right? I mean, without a doubt, the biggest question facing the industry is how to reinforce your business model and really build a pandemic-proof concept. And I think we've been seeing that, right? Extending patios and outdoor seating, expanding delivery capabilities, engaging with ghost kitchens and convenience-focused initiatives. They're all really critical to sort of absorbing and supporting against challenges in the future. So, in the end, none of us have a crystal ball, and I think, it's safe to say that while some of the things will return to their pre-pandemic state, others are going to be, forever changed. And there are so many questions that will come from that, right? and just a couple that popped to our mind that we thought were really sort of critical. What's going to happen with all those menu trends that were so relevant last year? Sustainability, plant-based proteins, cannabis infusion. Do they come back? We have seen recently some single-use plastic conversation back in the news. So will that have some staying power? And what other ones will sort of reemerge and come back into full view? Another question is, how much will concepts really evolve? And based on all that we've seen, what will that restaurant of the future really look like, and how will it be significantly or materially different than what we see today? And then finally, another one, will the loss of all these units and seats really help to strengthen those that survive, right? Are we going to see a rapid maturing of this industry as those who have the right concepts, the right strategies, the right access to capital, emerge from this and make smarter and more strategic choices, hopefully as they grow. So, let's end it like this. Like we said off the bat, the restaurant industry of the future, is going to look a lot different than it does today. And we all agree, I think, that this was going to happen regardless. It just really is happening a lot sooner than anyone would have thought. So that's the presentation for today. We do have a bit of time for some questions, but as I mentioned, we are going to send around a copy of this presentation and next week. And so I think what we might do to sort of address everybody's questions, both ones that have come in over the course of this presentation, as well as some that were submitted before, we might do a bit of a short FAQ to deal with some of those. And otherwise, obviously, we're more than happy to connect via email or phone after this presentation. So, Vince, just a couple of questions that have come in that I've just sort of keeping an eye on. One of them that's come in is asking around comparing and contrasting what's happening here in Canada versus, say, the U.S. and their restaurant market. And how do things look now, and how do they look coming out of this? And I know, I'm sure you've got a lot of interesting thoughts on this, just as I know you guys do a lot of work in the U.S. But I do have a couple of comments myself on that. One is, I think the U.S. market was way overbuilt and much more saturated than what we had up here. And as a result of that, or in part of that, you had a lot of companies that were far more over leveraged from a debt perspective. A lot of private equity money that had been pretty aggressive and was really sort of contributing not only to that sort of oversaturation, but also to maybe keeping some brands afloat that shouldn't have been. And all of that, of course, has led to some pretty aggressive restructuring that's going on down there, right? It's very public, the number of bankruptcies, especially in sort of that full service segment, that have been happening. And I think all that kind of tells you a little bit about what was going on in that market, pre-pandemic at least.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. I got some thought on that as well. So I do follow what the CREST numbers look like in many of the markets that we track around the world. And the one thing I'll say is that, as I mentioned earlier, their recovery curve has been a lot like ours. There was a deep dip in the beginning, and then it came back about halfway, almost right away, and it's been a long, slow, steady recovery for them since then. One difference, though, or a big difference, is that our dip here in Canada was much deeper than it was in the U.S. market. And there's a couple of reasons for that, because our markets really are different. First of all, we know that in Canada, most of the country was shut down for March and April, where there were some markets in the US which actually never completely shut down. So there was that aspect going on. The bigger development, though, is really that in Canada, we've got a much higher development of FSRs, the full service restaurants. And that is, again, because of the older demographic that we have here in Canada, 55 plus. It's a much younger population base in the US, so their market is much more reliant on QSR and even C&G, convenience and gas, for their food service occasions. And just like here in Canada, those two market segments have been least impacted during this time. So with all of the FSR restaurants here in Canada and the reticence of the 55 plus cohort that frequents them to visit restaurants right now, I think our recovery is going to be, again, we dipped a little bit deeper here in Canada, and I think our recovery is going to be a little bit slower here in Canada versus the US. That has certainly proven to be the case over the first 8 months of this.
Right. Another question that has come in is around sort of profitability. Probably more long-term profitability of the segment, and what that's going to look like. And I have some thoughts on that, but maybe I'll throw it back to you, Vince, first. If what your thoughts are on profitability of this industry going forward.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question, Jacob. I know, speaking to operators and manufacturers, one of the things I'm hearing is that yes, profitability is going to be challenged right now. One of the issues is, of course, PPE and safety protocols that everybody's having to now accommodate in their restaurants or in their facilities, and that is adding expense. And it's adding expense at a time when many operators have reduced traffic flow and reduced dollars, reduced revenue. So that makes it difficult. Then you add on the expense of deliveries. Now, deliveries, when they're 4 or 5% of volume for an operator, well, they could absorb those delivery fees without any problem. But now we're hearing a lot of media and even governments trying to get involved and influence the delivery fees, because operators who are having to rely on this revenue source for half, if not more, of their revenue are really struggling to pay for those high delivery fees. So that's a challenge. And the other thing I'm hearing too is about menu rationalization. Again, with reduced volume, a lot of operators have cut back on the number of items on their menu. They're cutting back on waste, they're cutting back on prep time, cutting back on labor, and just cutting back on the inventory. So all of these things means that the operators are really turning to their manufacturer partners, their distributor partners, to help them with menu development and helps them to be as efficient and effective as they can in this new reality where they're really suffering from diminished volumes.
Yeah, and I think there really could be, if you look a bit more long term on this, I think there could be a really good potential for a rebound, right? The reduction in seats in the units are going to have a material impact on competition, and in a market that had been relatively flat in terms of traffic and sort of consumers, this could be have a positive impact from that on those that are surviving on the other side of this. And also because as we saw during this pandemic, and we continue to see, there's no shortage of demand out there, and consumers want to go out and they want to eat and hang out in restaurants. Also, I think I think there was a bit of perspective that there was a glass ceiling on pricing, going back to last year, and you couldn't kind of drive higher menu prices. And I think we've learned and have seen that might not be the case, and that there again, with all that demand, there would be an ability to absorb some additional price, and that obviously is going to really help margins, and it's going to really help profitability of these restaurants. And again, yeah, and I guess the other thing is just going back to what you were saying too about operating costs, right? There should be improved labor, there should be improved rent. Those are very, those are high percentages of a restaurant cost structure. And even in operators, of course, from the onset of COVID, did a lot of really good things to sort of tighten up and make adjustments and become more operationally efficient, right? They reduced G&A, they cut head office where they had to. So there's things there that are going to position them better to come out of this. So that's my thought. We got time for one more, and I'm gonna put this one all on you, Vince, and it's the crystal ball question. What do you think the rebound and recovery is going to look like, and how long?
Yeah, I've been in this business 10 years, 10 plus years at NPE, and everybody always asks, what's the future going to look like? But I've had that question more times in the last 6 to 8 months than in the previous 9.5 years, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I wish my crystal ball wasn't as fuzzy, but it's just like everybody else's, I think, right now. I do read a lot on the industry and from other third-party sources. Everything I'm seeing from industry analysts and from just general economic news, I'm thinking it's probably going to be 2 to 3 years after the virus is under control before we can get back to 2019 volumes. And that would recover those 8 years of lost revenue and traffic that we've suffered through the last 8 months. I think it's going to be a long, slow recovery before we are back to business at the top line level.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you, Vince. I think that's probably the right time frame. We'd love it to be sooner, but there are some challenges and hurdles that we have to work through there. So as we wrap up today, obviously I want to remind everybody listening here that there are 3 more sessions this week, and please register if you haven't already done so at our website, restaurantsummit.ca. Again, I just want to say, obviously, first off, Vince, thanks for joining me and providing your insight. I really think it was a great session and a lot of interesting stuff going around with it.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Jacob. It was great to be here with you.
Great. Thank you again to our sponsors who have been supportive and really engaged in this the whole time. We appreciate your support and participation. And obviously, last, thank you to the audience for joining us today, and hope that you enjoyed the session, and hope to see you back here tomorrow and for the rest of the week for some additional and interesting insights. Have a great rest of the day.